was a quiet afternoon in the suburban neighborhood of Crestwood Estates, the kind of place where every lawn was meticulously trimmed, every fence freshly painted, and every resident seemingly living the picture-perfect life. But beneath this calm, a storm was quietly brewing, one that would shatter the illusion of safety that had long protected this community. Leila Morris, an 18-year-old college student home for the summer, had just finished a late lunch and decided to take a walk through the neighborhood's tree-lined streets. She was dressed casually, a pair of denim shorts, a loose t-shirt, and her headphones tucked around her neck. Her presence, casual and unassuming, seemed harmless, but for the man who had been watching her from his unmarked car, it was an invitation. The man, in his early 30s with a square jaw and cold eyes, wore a uniform that looked almost like that of a police officer. His badge gleamed faintly in the sun, catching the light in a way that made it seem official to anyone who glanced quickly. But in truth, he was no officer. He had purchased the uniform online and had spent weeks practicing his authority voice, the kind that could intimidate strangers without ever raising a hand. As Leila walked past a quiet cul-de-sac, he stepped out of his car. "Excuse me, miss," he called, his tone firm but casual. "Can I see some identification?" Leila paused, frowning. She was used to neighborhood security, sure, but this felt different. Something about the man's posture, the calculated way he approached her, made her gut tighten. I don't think I need to show you my ID," she said, her voice wavering slightly. He smiled, a slow, practiced smile. "Miss, this is a simple request. I'm conducting a routine check in the neighborhood. Just show me your ID and we'll be done." Leila hesitated. She had always been respectful toward authority figures, but something about this situation felt off. She glanced around. The street was empty, no neighbors in sight, no familiar faces to witness this interaction. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, but politeness rooted her to the spot. "Why me? Why not someone else?" she asked cautiously. "Just a routine check," he said, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "Nothing to worry about if you cooperate." As he reached toward his belt, pretending to adjust his holster, Leila's heart raced. Her mind scrambled through every warning she had ever received about strangers, about people pretending to be cops. She needed a way out, a reason to walk away safely. "Look, I don't feel comfortable," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm going to go now." The man's expression hardened. "I don't think so, you need to stay here for a moment." It was then that Leila's phone buzzed. She fumbled for it in her pocket, hands trembling. On the screen was a text from her mother: "Be careful, don't trust anyone in uniform you don't know." Her heart skipped a beat. Her mother, the HOA president of this very community, had always been hyper-aware of security threats. Leila realized that something wasn't right, that the man before her might be dangerous. She had to think fast. She straightened her posture, summoning courage she didn't know she had. "I'm calling my mother," she said loudly, pressing the phone to her ear. The man's eyes flicked toward the phone, and for the first time there was a crack in his confident demeanor. "You don't need to do that," he snapped, stepping closer. But Leila didn't back down. She pressed the call. "Hi, Mom, there's a man here claiming to be a cop. Her voice faltered, but she pushed on. "He won't let me leave." Her mother's voice came through immediately, sharp and commanding. "Leila, stay calm, don't hang up. Where are you?" "By the cul-de-sac near 42 Maple Drive," Leila replied. There was a pause, and then her mother's tone turned ice cold. "Stay on the line, I'm calling security and the local police." The man's demeanor shifted rapidly. He wasn't prepared for this level of authority. He knew enough to realize that he had crossed a line, but he tried to maintain control. "Miss, there's no need to overreact," he said, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "I'm not overreacting," Leila said, her voice firmer now. "I'm the daughter of the HOA president. You do not want to mess with me." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Recognition flashed in his eyes, quickly masked by a forced grin. "The HOA president's daughter," he repeated almost mockingly. I didn't know." Leila's mother's voice boomed through the phone. "I know exactly what you're doing. Step back immediately or you'll regret it." The man stumbled, caught off guard. For a moment the street seemed to shrink around them, the tension crackling like electricity. Leila realized she had the upper hand now, not because of strength or weapons, but because she had invoked the authority her mother wielded and the neighborhood respect it commanded. The man's gaze darted around. He saw the neatly trimmed lawns, the quiet streets, the houses filled with residents who trusted the HOA implicitly. He understood now that he was dangerously out of place. "Listen," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I didn't mean any harm, I just—" "You're lying," Leela cut in, her voice icy, "and you're about to face the consequences." From behind him, the faint sound of a car engine could be heard. Leela knew immediately it wasn't just any vehicle. It was one of her mother's security team, always alert and monitoring the community. The man's face went pale. By the time the security SUV pulled up, he was frozen in place. The doors swung open and two burly men stepped out, each wearing a serious, unyielding expression. "Step away from her," one of them commanded. The man looked around desperately, realizing he had no options left. He tried to flee, but the security team was faster, intercepting him before he could even take 2 steps. Leela watched, her chest heaving as he was restrained. "Who are you really?" she demanded, keeping her phone pressed to her ear, her mother's voice still guiding her. The man hesitated, then muttered something incoherent. He knew revealing his identity would only worsen his predicament. The realization of his failure was written all over his face. Her mother arrived minutes later, stepping out of her car with an air of authority that made everyone around her take notice. She walked directly to Leela, enveloping her in a protective embrace, then turned her gaze to the restrained man. "Do you have any idea who you just tried to intimidate?" she asked, her voice low, but every word carried weight. The man didn't answer. He knew the answer would make him look even worse. "You just made the mistake of your life," she continued. "In this neighborhood we protect our own, and no uniform, no matter how convincing, will let you walk away with lies and intimidation." Leela felt a mix of relief, fear, and pride. She had stood her ground and her mother's intervention had ensured her safety, but the incident left a lingering unease. How many other people had this man fooled? How long had he been watching the community? And most importantly, what would he do next? As they escorted him toward the waiting authorities, Leela's mother placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did well, Leela. Most people would have been scared into silence, but you stood your ground. That's something to be proud of." Leela nodded, her thoughts racing. She had learned something invaluable that day. Authority could be faked, but courage could not. And in Crestwood Estates, the illusion of safety could be shattered in an instant by someone bold enough to exploit it. But deep in her mind, a question lingered, one that would refuse to leave her. If a man could so brazenly pretend to be a cop, what other secrets was this seemingly perfect neighborhood hiding? And as the sun dipped behind the rows of pristine houses, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, Leela knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of a story that would expose far more than she ever imagined. The quiet of Crestwood Estates had been broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The streets of Crestwood Estates were calm again, but the sense of unease lingered like a stubborn shadow. Leela walked beside her mother, her mind racing faster than her heartbeat. The encounter with the fake cop had rattled her to the core, and she couldn't stop replaying it, the coldness in his eyes, the way he had tried to corner her. She realized with an unsettling clarity that the neighborhood she had always trusted was far more vulnerable than she'd ever imagined. Her mother, Grace Morris, led her into their house, the front door shutting behind them with a definitive click that seemed to seal them in a fragile sense of safety. Grace's face, normally composed and commanding, now showed the tension of someone who had just witnessed a threat against their own family. She motioned for Leela to sit, then called the security team on her phone. "We need the full report," Grace said, her voice clipped and professional. "Every camera angle, every witness. I want a timeline. I need to know exactly how long he's been watching this neighborhood." Leela listened, feeling a mixture of fear and fascination. Her mother always seemed to know exactly what to do, but this situation felt different. It wasn't just a trespasser or petty criminal. This man had planned, or at least attempted, a very personal intimidation. That sent chills down her spine. While the security team compiled the footage, Leela wandered to the window overlooking the street. Her gaze lingered on the unmarked car, now towed away, the man's presence fading into a memory that seemed too unreal to be true. She shivered. What had motivated him? Was it just a thrill, a sense of power, or something deeper? Grace returned, a tablet in her hand. She motioned for Leela to see the footage. On the screen, the man was there long before their confrontation. He had been driving slowly up and down the cul-de-sac, sometimes stopping to stare at houses, sometimes pretending to check his phone. There was a meticulousness to his surveillance, a patience that made Leela's stomach churn. "He's been watching for weeks," Grace said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "This wasn't random. He chose you. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't, but he picked the wrong person to intimidate." Leela felt a wave of fear mixed with defiance. "Why me?" she asked softly, almost to herself. "Why would anyone target me?" Grace didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied her daughter with an intensity that made Leela uneasy. "Because you're connected to me," she said finally. "Because in our world, someone like you represents power, influence, and attention. People like him, they don't understand boundaries. They don't know who they're dealing with until it's too late." Leela absorbed her mother's words. The idea that she was now a visible target in her own neighborhood was terrifying, but also strangely empowering. She had confronted him, called for help, and survived. That realization gave her a spark of determination she hadn't felt before. The next day, Leela decided to walk the neighborhood again, this time with a sense of vigilance she had never needed before. Every sound, every movement, every shadow felt amplified. And it was during that walk that she noticed something she hadn't seen before: a small, nondescript house at the end of the cul-de-sac, windows darkened, yet a faint flicker of movement visible inside. Her curiosity piqued, she slowed down. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a figure standing near the window, a man watching. Panic surged through her, but this time it was tempered by awareness and readiness. She didn't run, she didn't freeze. Instead, she whipped out her phone, activated the camera, and snapped a quick photo. The man saw her and flinched, retreating behind the curtain. Leela's heart pounded, but she knew she had just gathered evidence. This was no longer just a scare, it was proof that someone had been planning, watching, and waiting. When she got home, she immediately showed the footage to her mother. Grace's face darkened as she examined the photo. This is worse than I thought," she murmured. "He's not just a fake cop, he's organized, and he's testing the neighborhood's defenses." Leela felt a chill. Testing why? Grace leaned back, her mind clearly working through scenarios. Some people thrive on control. They want to see how far they can push, who they can intimidate. When they find someone connected to power like you, they think it gives them leverage. "But he didn't know I was your daughter until I said something," Leela pointed out. "He was caught off guard." Grace nodded. "Yes, and that mistake will teach him, but it doesn't make him harmless. People like him adapt quickly. That's why we need a plan." Over the next few hours, the Morris household became a command center. Every security feed was monitored, every access point reviewed, and neighbors quietly informed to be alert. Grace reached out to law enforcement, explaining the situation and providing the evidence they had gathered. But Leela could sense the frustration in her mother's tone. Official channels moved slowly, while someone like this fake cop could act fast. As night fell, Leela couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the day's events in her mind, her anxiety growing. Then, a faint sound outside caught her attention, a soft tapping on the window like fingernails brushing glass. She froze, her breath caught. Slowly, she turned toward the sound, but the street outside was empty. Yet the feeling of being watched didn't leave her. She realized something unsettling. The man hadn't given up. He hadn't fled in fear. He was adapting, learning, and waiting for another opportunity. The next morning, Leela decided to take control. She couldn't just wait for her mother or security or the police. She needed to understand who this man was, what he wanted, and how deep his reach went. She began by retracing his steps. Using the surveillance footage, she noted the times he drove past, the routes he favored, even the types of cars he lingered near. Patterns began to emerge. He wasn't random, he had method, almost like a chess player studying his opponent before making a move. Leela shared her findings with her mother, who was impressed. "You're learning quickly," Grace said, "but remember, knowledge without caution can be dangerous." Over the next few days, tensions escalated. The man's presence became more brazen. He left notes, cryptic, threatening messages slipped under doors or tucked into mailboxes. Each one was designed to intimidate, but also to test the neighborhood's reaction. And each time, Leela and Grace responded with calm precision, documenting everything, fortifying defenses, and maintaining a careful balance between vigilance and composure. One evening, as the sun set and shadows stretched long across the streets, Leela spotted him again, this time across the neighborhood park. He wasn't approaching, just observing. His gaze met hers for a moment, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, then as quickly as he appeared he vanished into the twilight. Leela's heart raced, but she didn't panic. Instead, she felt a strange sense of resolve. This was no longer about fear. It was about understanding, anticipating, and ultimately confronting someone who had tried to wield fear as power. Grace noticed her daughter's intensity and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're ready to take the next step," she said. "We need to confront him not recklessly but with authority. This ends when we decide it ends." Leela nodded. She realized that day that courage wasn't just standing up once, it was preparing, strategizing, and facing the threat with clarity and purpose. And the threat, she knew, was closer than ever. As night fell over Crestwood Estates, the man's silhouette appeared once more, this time on a hill overlooking the neighborhood, watching like a predator. But Leela had changed. She wasn't the girl he had tried to intimidate anymore. She was aware, alert, and ready. And somewhere deep down, she knew that the confrontation, when it came, would reveal truths that went far beyond a fake cop, far beyond a simple threat. Secrets would be exposed, alliances tested, and the very foundation of their neighborhood would tremble under the weight of what was about to unfold. And just as the clock struck midnight, Leela whispered to herself, a mixture of fear and determination in her voice, "I won't let him control us, not now, not ever." The calm of Crestwood Estates was gone, replaced by an anticipation that hung heavy in the night air. And in that darkness, the first real move of a dangerous game was about to begin. The following morning, the neighborhood awoke to an unusual tension. Crestwood Estates, a place that had always thrived on routine and order, now seemed like a stage set for uncertainty. Even the sunlight, filtering lazily through the trees, couldn't dispel the lingering shadow cast by the man who had dared to threaten the HOA President's daughter. Leela woke early, her mind refusing to rest. She dressed quickly, determined to continue her investigation, but this time with a more active role. No longer content to merely observe patterns on security footage, she planned to gather first-hand evidence, moving carefully through the neighborhood to record everything suspicious. She felt the adrenaline of purpose, the sense that each step she took was a measure of control against the chaos the man had tried to instill. Her mother, Grace, had prepared her. "Patience and observation are your best tools," she said, handing Leela a small, discreet recording device. "We need concrete evidence if we're going to catch him in the act. Don't confront him directly yet, let him make a mistake and we'll be ready." Leela nodded, slipping the device into her pocket. She stepped outside, the summer air warm but tinged with an uneasy electricity. Every rustling leaf and distant dog bark made her pulse quicken, but she remained focused, scanning streets, houses, and parked cars for any sign of the man who had turned her world upside down. It wasn't long before she saw him. Across the street, partially hidden behind the shadow of a hedge, the figure of the man appeared. He was dressed in civilian clothing this time, a baseball cap pulled low over his face, yet his posture betrayed him, rigid, tense, constantly scanning his surroundings. He was observing the neighborhood again, just as he had before, just as he had observed her. Leela's heart pounded. She activated the recorder discreetly, following him at a safe distance. He moved with purpose, checking cars, glancing toward windows, occasionally scribbling notes in a small notebook. Every action seemed calculated, every glance deliberate. It was clear that his obsession with surveillance extended beyond her alone. He was mapping the neighborhood, testing its defenses, and gauging the reactions of its residents. She trailed him quietly until he reached the small park at the center of the community. There he paused, surveying the area as though memorizing every detail. Leela crouched behind a large oak, recording silently, noting every move. Then unexpectedly he reached into his pocket and pulled out a device, a small handheld scanner, the kind used to detect cameras or alarm signals. Leela's pulse spiked. He wasn't just a fake cop, he was professional, tech-savvy, and dangerous. He had done his homework. He knew how to avoid being caught, how to manipulate situations, how to observe without being observed. And now he was actively testing the neighborhood's defenses, including her mother's private security system. For hours, she watched him from a safe distance, documenting his movements. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, he finally seemed to leave, disappearing into the evening shadows. Leela exhaled, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. She returned home, knowing her mother would want to see the evidence immediately. Grace studied the footage intently. "This is more organized than I imagined," she murmured, scrolling through frames with a critical eye. "He isn't just targeting you, he's mapping the neighborhood. If he wants leverage, he's building a detailed understanding of every house, every routine, every weakness." Leela frowned, but why? What does he want? Grace's eyes hardened. Power, fear, control. People like him thrive on influence. He wants to know that he can intimidate the neighborhood without consequence, and he chose you because you are connected to authority here, my authority. Leela shivered at the thought. The man's obsession wasn't casual, it was dangerous, and with each passing day, his knowledge of the neighborhood and its vulnerabilities was growing. The following days were a tense blur. Leela continued her quiet surveillance, documenting every suspicious movement, while Grace coordinated with local law enforcement and the HOA's private security team. They installed extra cameras, adjusted lighting, and even brought in a temporary patrol car to give the impression of heightened vigilance. But no matter what they did, the feeling of being watched never dissipated. One evening, Leela decided to check the cul-de-sac again. The streetlights cast long shadows and the air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass. She walked slowly, every step deliberate, every movement careful. And then she saw him emerging from the shadowed end of the street, moving with caution but this time with a hint of desperation in his posture. He froze when he saw her, and for a moment they simply stared at each other across the dimly lit street. Then, as if calculating, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows once more. Leela's stomach twisted. He was still there, he hadn't given up. He was still studying, still calculating. The next morning brought an unexpected twist. Grace received a call from law enforcement urging caution. "We've traced some activity linked to him," the officer said. "But it's fragmented. He's been careful, he's smart, and he knows how to stay under the radar. If he's aware you're watching, he'll change tactics." Grace hung up, her jaw tight. "He's evolving," she said to Leela. "Every move we make he adapts, and now he knows someone is tracking him." Leela felt a surge of determination. She couldn't back down, not now, not when she had evidence, insight, and support from her mother and the security team. She needed to be ready for whatever came next. Days passed and the tension escalated. The man's tactics became bolder. He began leaving small notes in mailboxes, threatening, cryptic, designed to instill fear. One note read, "I know your routines, I see everything." Another said, "Authority means nothing, you will learn that soon." The neighborhood was tense, residents whispering and locking doors, everyone feeling the invisible eyes of someone who shouldn't have access to their lives. Leela began strategizing. She realized that confronting him directly could be dangerous, but allowing him to continue would only embolden him. She worked with her mother to plan a controlled encounter, one where they could assert authority, gather concrete evidence, and finally put an end to his harassment. They set up a decoy. Leela would walk through the neighborhood as if alone, under careful surveillance from multiple cameras and the HOA's security team hidden nearby. Grace would monitor from the house, coordinating every movement, every step. It was risky, but it was necessary. That evening, as Leela walked with measured steps, she felt the familiar tension in the air. And then she saw him again emerging from the shadows near the park. His eyes scanned the street, and for a moment their gazes locked. He recognized her immediately. Leela's heart raced, but she stayed calm. She moved deliberately as though unaware of the team observing. The man hesitated, sensing something was different this time. The streets, once empty, now seemed alive with hidden watchers. As he approached, he reached into his pocket, perhaps expecting to intimidate her as before, but before he could act, Grace's voice came through a hidden speaker, firm and commanding. "Step back, you are trespassing. You will be detained immediately." The man froze, panic flashing in his eyes. Every movement, every calculated step he had taken over weeks, faltered under the weight of authority he hadn't anticipated. The HOA security team emerged simultaneously, surrounding him and leaving no room to escape. Leela stepped forward, voice steady, unwavering. "This ends now. You are done threatening anyone here. You will face the consequences." For the first time, the man looked truly defeated. The weight of his actions, the consequences he had ignored, and the power of a family and community united against him were undeniable. He was caught, not through force alone, but through strategy, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Grace approached, placing a firm hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You did well," she said softly. "You faced him with courage and calm, and that is how you win against people like this." The man was escorted away, his face a mixture of fear and disbelief. Leela watched him go, a sense of relief mingling with lingering unease. He had been more than just a fake cop, he had been a predator, cunning and dangerous, but together they had stopped him. As the neighborhood began to settle again, Leela realized the lesson she had learned was profound. Power could be threatened, authority could be challenged, but courage, vigilance, and unity were far stronger than any uniform or facade. Yet even as the streets of Crestwood Estates returned to a fragile peace, a shadow of doubt lingered. Was he truly gone, or was this just the first step in a longer, more complex game of observation and control? The quiet of the night held a tension that refused to dissipate, a reminder that in a world of hidden threats and deceptive appearances, vigilance was never optional. And as Leela gazed out over the neighborhood, she understood something fundamental. The battle between fear and courage was ongoing, and every shadow could conceal a lesson, every quiet street a secret. The following week, Crestwood Estates was on high alert. Even though the fake cop had been detained, the neighborhood's sense of security was fractured, fragile as glass. Residents whispered behind closed doors, locking doors and windows that had always been open. The streets, once calm and predictable, now carried the tension of a community that had been watched and tested. Leela stood at her bedroom window, gazing down the quiet street. She had thought the confrontation was the end, that their careful planning and courage had stopped him. But a part of her knew that in a world of manipulation and hidden agendas, closure was never absolute. She could still feel the weight of eyes upon her, a lingering echo of fear and vigilance. Her mother entered the room, Grace's expression unreadable but serious. She placed a hand on Leela's shoulder. "We need to prepare for the possibility that he isn't done," she said. "Men like him don't quit easily. He's been exposed, yes, but exposure often breeds obsession. We have to anticipate his next move." Leela nodded, her jaw tight. She had grown through the past week, learning to move with awareness and purpose, but the thought of the man plotting from some hidden corner made her stomach tighten. She knew that courage alone wasn't enough. Now, strategy and intelligence were required. The days that followed were tense but productive. Grace coordinated with law enforcement to secure restraining orders while simultaneously strengthening the HOA's private security network. Every street, alleyway, and corner of the neighborhood was mapped for surveillance, lights adjusted to eliminate shadows, and patrol schedules varied to avoid predictability. Leela, meanwhile, became an active part of the plan. She had begun studying the man's behavior patterns, predicting his movements based on the footage she had gathered. She learned how he thought, how he anticipated reactions, and how he sought control through fear. One late afternoon, Leela noticed something peculiar on her tablet. A camera feed from the neighborhood park showed a figure moving at the edge of the shadows, a man wearing a hoodie, low cap pulled down, glancing frequently toward the surveillance camera. Her pulse spiked. It was him. He had returned. She called her mother immediately. "Mom, he's back," she whispered, her voice tense but controlled. "He's at the park watching. I think he knows we're prepared now." Grace's voice was calm but resolute. "Good, that means he's taking the bait. Keep your distance, do not engage, let him show himself. I'll coordinate the response. This is our moment." For the next several hours, Leela observed. The man moved cautiously, testing the area, pretending to be casual, but the careful way he approached each corner revealed his intent. He was probing, looking for weaknesses, trying to find gaps in the neighborhood's defenses. Finally, he made a mistake. He lingered too long near a security camera, not realizing it had recently been updated with motion sensors and remote monitoring. A silent alarm was triggered, and Grace's voice came through a hidden speaker in the park. "You are trespassing. Leave immediately or authorities will be called." The man froze. For a moment it seemed as if he might flee, but instead his expression hardened. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore, it was personal. His eyes locked on Leela, who had been observing from a safe distance, and for the first time there was recognition mixed with anger and fear. Grace instructed Leela to stay hidden while the HOA's security team moved in. They surrounded the park, emerging from shadowed paths, their presence swift and decisive. The man's options dwindled with every step, his calculations faltering. Leela felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He had tested them, manipulated them, and harassed her, but now the balance had shifted. Authority, preparation, and courage had cornered him. The man tried to flee, darting toward the nearest alley, but two security guards blocked his path. Grace stepped forward, her posture commanding, every inch the embodiment of authority. "This ends now," she said. "You will not threaten this neighborhood or my family ever again." The man's shoulders slumped, the fight leaving his body. He was no longer the confident, calculated predator who had stalked Leela for weeks. He was exposed, trapped, and entirely at the mercy of a community united against him. He was taken into custody by law enforcement soon after, and as he was led away, he muttered something under his breath, something unintelligible, almost desperate. Leela watched, a mix of satisfaction and lingering apprehension coursing through her. The man was gone, but the experience had left an indelible mark on her psyche. That evening, the neighborhood began the slow process of recovery. Residents cautiously returned to their routines, locking doors but speaking openly, sharing concerns and stories of their own near encounters with strangers. Leela walked through the streets alongside her mother, noting the renewed vigilance, the subtle changes in behavior, and the unspoken understanding that Crestwood Estates had been transformed. Her mother turned to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've grown," Grace said softly, "not just because of courage but because of awareness. You've learned to read people, to anticipate danger, and to act decisively when it matters. That's more powerful than any uniform or authority badge." Leela smiled faintly. She had faced fear head-on and emerged stronger, more aware, and more confident. But even as relief washed over her, she felt a lingering tension. The man's obsession had been unnerving, and while he was detained, the world was full of people who sought control and power through intimidation. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the week's events. She thought about the man, about the meticulous planning, the stalking, and the threats. And she thought about herself, how she had transformed from a frightened girl into someone capable of confronting danger with intelligence and courage. Days turned into weeks and life in Crestwood Estates gradually normalized. The HOA increased patrols, residents became more vigilant, and security protocols were improved. Yet beneath the surface, Leela felt a quiet awareness, a recognition that safety was never permanent, that vigilance had to be constant, and that courage was as much about preparation as it was about confrontation. Then came an unexpected moment of revelation. While reviewing the man's belongings, law enforcement discovered a notebook filled with meticulous notes, sketches of the neighborhood, and detailed observations of Leela herself. But more striking was a section marked with her name, followed by a series of calculations, assumptions, and predictions about her behavior. It was chilling. He had been planning for weeks, even imagining potential responses to every scenario. And yet, he had underestimated her. He had misjudged her courage, her intelligence, and the unwavering authority her mother embodied. Leela felt a mixture of fear and vindication. The man had been methodical, precise, and terrifyingly organized, but he had been caught by the one thing he couldn't anticipate: the determination and unity of a family and a community that refused to be intimidated. Grace looked at her daughter, pride evident in her eyes. "You've learned something most people never do," she said. "Power isn't about uniforms, badges, or fear. True power comes from awareness, courage, and the ability to act decisively when the moment calls for it." Leela nodded, absorbing the lesson. She realized that while the threat had been real, so too had been her capacity to confront it. And in that realization, she found strength she hadn't known existed. As the sun set over Crestwood Estates, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, Leela walked through the neighborhood one last time, a sense of calm settling over her. She felt the weight of what had transpired, but she also felt a quiet triumph. They had faced fear, stood their ground, and reclaimed their home. But even as peace returned, the memory lingered: the fake cop, the stalking, the shadow of threat that had loomed over her life. And Leela knew that while this chapter had ended, vigilance and courage would always be a part of her story. Because in a world where appearances could deceive and authority could be faked, the true measure of safety and strength was not in the uniform, but in the awareness, courage, and resolve of those who refused to be intimidated. And as Leela gazed out at the quiet streets, she whispered softly to herself, a vow carried on the evening breeze: "No one will ever control me with fear. Not now, not ever." The night air settled over the neighborhood, serene yet charged with the echoes of what had happened. Shadows lingered, but Leela walked confidently, knowing that courage and vigilance had won. The story of the fake cop had ended, but the lessons, the awareness, and the strength gained would remain forever. Crestwood Estates had survived, and in its survival, Leela had discovered a power greater than fear. A power born of courage, family, and the unwavering resolve to face danger head-on. And somewhere beyond the edges of the neighborhood, a lesson had been learned by someone who had thought himself untouchable. True authority is not claimed, it is earned, and it cannot be faked.